breaking news from London where Prince Andrew will no longer use his royal titles, including Duke of York.
Yeah, the Prince revealed the bombshell decision after talks with his brother, King Charles.
A seismic shift within the House of Windsor. In a move both shocking and irreversible, King Charles III has officially stripped Prince Andrew of his remaining royal titles. Whispers inside the palace suggest mounting public outrage, private family rifts, and tabloid revelations forced the king's hand. Courtiers describe the atmosphere as frozen in disbelief, while royal aides scramble to contain the fallout. But was this truly about scandal, or something far deeper within the monarchy's fragile core? The final break between brothers. It began as whispers, then erupted into a storm. For years, the figure of Prince Andrew had hovered uneasily over the British monarchy, his name frequently paired with controversy, his reputation shadowing an institution that prides itself on control, dignity, and tradition. But this time, the palace walls could no longer contain the noise. The revelation that forced King Charles III's hand came on October 17th, a date that will be remembered as the day the monarchy drew a firm, painful line. Fresh emails, unearthed just days earlier, revealed that Andrew had maintained contact with convicted offender Jeffrey Epstein long after he had publicly claimed to have cut ties. The discovery shattered what little trust remained. The British public, already weary of years of scandal surrounding Andrew's questionable friendships and business dealings, reacted with outrage. The damage, once merely reputational, now threatened the very credibility of the crown itself. The palace response was swift, measured, but unmistakably final. On Friday, Buckingham Palace released a statement from Prince Andrew himself. It confirmed what many had long suspected would come. The king's younger brother would relinquish the last of his royal titles, a move intended to preserve the work and dignity of His Majesty. It was not a choice freely made, but a decision shaped by immense public pressure and the unrelenting weight of institutional survival. Craig Prescott, a constitutional law expert at Royal Holloway University of London, spoke bluntly about the breach of trust. To say something which has proven not to be true, that's the straw that broke the camel's back, he explained. The sentiment echoed across the nation. Andrew's misleading statements weren't just seen as personal failings. They were viewed as a betrayal of public confidence, the one thing the monarchy can't afford to lose. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere within Buckingham Palace was said to be tense, heavy with both duty and regret. For King Charles, this was not merely a disciplinary act, but a reckoning, an unavoidable confrontation between the role of a monarch and the emotions of a brother. His mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, had long been Andrew's shield, maintaining a quiet yet unwavering loyalty to her son despite the turmoil surrounding him. But under Charles' reign, sentimentality gave way to pragmatism. This was a new era, one where the survival of the institution outweighed the bonds of blood. The pressure to act had been mounting for months, but the exposure of those emails turned murmurs into demands. British citizens, commentators, and international observers alike called for decisive action. The monarchy, so often accused of moving at a glacial pace, was finally forced to accelerate. Behind palace doors, senior advisors and royals debated how far the punishment should go, but there was little room for mercy. The public had spoken, and the institution's image was at stake. And so, under the weight of decades of scandal and silence, a final decision was made. Andrew's remaining honors would be withdrawn. His royal identity, once a symbol of privilege, was now a liability too great to bear. The man once known as the Duke of York stood stripped of his titles, his reputation in tatters, his connection to the crown reduced to mere bloodline. So how did a prince born into privilege become the monarchy's greatest risk? Forcing a brother to choose duty over blood. Stay tuned. When bloodlines collided with survival. By the time the statement was released, it was clear this was no act of choice. It was compliance dressed as dignity. Prince Andrew's announcement, carefully crafted and delivered through Buckingham Palace, declared that he would no longer use his noble titles, including his most defining, the Duke of York. The words suggested humility, a wish not to distract from the good work of His Majesty. Yet behind those polished lines lay a much colder truth. According to palace insiders, this was not a voluntary gesture. It was an ultimatum, quietly but firmly delivered by King Charles himself. For the 76-year-old monarch, battling an undisclosed form of cancer while steering one of the oldest institutions in the world, this was about more than scandal. It was about survival. His reign, still in its infancy, has been defined by an unspoken mission to secure the monarchy's future for his heir, Prince William. That mission required cleansing the crown of every shadow that threatened its credibility, no matter how personal the cost. Prince William, already stepping into a more visible role, recently voiced his vision for a modernized monarchy, one grounded in accountability and purpose. "The monarchy must be a force for good," he said. In the eyes of royal commentators, Andrew had become the opposite of that ideal, a reminder of the institution's darkest chapters. As Craig Prescott of Royal Holloway University observed, there is no space for that in the modern monarchy. Andrew's downfall didn't happen overnight. It began years earlier, rooted in his notorious friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted offender whose death in 2019 left behind a legacy of scandal and unanswered questions. Andrew's visits to Epstein's properties, even after Epstein's conviction, ignited global outrage and permanently tainted his name. Then came the explosive accusation from Virginia Giuffre, who alleged that Andrew had assaulted her when she was a trafficked teenager. He denied every claim, but his attempt to defend himself in a 2019 BBC Newsnight interview only deepened the disaster. His tone appeared detached, his answers evasive, and his infamous claim that he did not sweat became a symbol of royal delusion. In early 2022, under pressure from both the public and within the palace, Andrew was stripped of his military affiliations and his Royal Highness status. Though he later reached an out-of-court settlement with Giuffre for an undisclosed sum, one he insisted was not an admission of guilt, the damage was irreversible. His reputation lay in ruins, and the monarchy's trust deficit widened with every headline. But the final blow came more recently. A leaked email, allegedly sent from Andrew to a controversial financier, hinted that he might still be using his former royal connections for influence. The revelation painted not only Andrew, but also senior royals in a deeply compromising light. For King Charles, who has spent decades championing transparency, reform, and restraint, the implication that his brother's actions could tarnish his reign was intolerable. Behind palace walls, the atmosphere turned grave. Sources revealed that a private meeting was convened, likely attended by the king and senior advisors. Andrew was confronted directly and asked one defining question. Was there anything else? Any further scandal, correspondence, or connection that could erupt into public view? His reported answer sent a chill through the room. He couldn't give any guarantees. That uncertainty sealed his fate. For Charles, it was the moment emotion had to yield to duty. A monarch could forgive, but he could not gamble with the crown. And so, in an act both merciless and necessary, the king moved to sever the last formal ties binding his brother to royal life. The monarchy's future, in Charles's mind, depended on it. Yet as Andrew's titles faded into history, another truth lingered quietly in the air, one that no statement could conceal. Behind the grandeur of monarchy lay a family fractured by the weight of its own survival. And now, as the echoes of that decision still haunt the palace halls, was this truly justice served, or a royal sacrifice born of desperation? Keep watching. The final fall of Prince Andrew. By the time the king's ultimatum reached him, the writing had long been on the wall. Prince Andrew's slow descent into exile had begun years earlier, in November 2019, when his attempt to defend himself publicly became one of the most catastrophic interviews in modern royal history. Sitting across from the BBC's Emily Maitlis in a heavily scrutinized Newsnight broadcast, Andrew sought to refute claims about his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein and deny allegations that he had slept with Virginia Giuffre. then a 17-year-old girl illegally transported by the disgraced financier in 2001. Instead, what unfolded was a performance so tone-deaf, so devoid of empathy, that it sealed his fate. The prince's words, meant to clear his name, only reinforced public disgust. His bizarre explanations and refusal to express sympathy for Epstein's victims became the defining image of royal arrogance in crisis. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Within days, Andrew was forced to withdraw from public life and resign from his positions at the charity. It was the beginning of a long and humiliating unraveling that would culminate in the events of October 17th, when King Charles moved decisively to strip him of his remaining royal privileges. The seeds of that decision, however, were planted the very moment the cameras stopped rolling in 2019. One particular claim from that interview, that Andrew had severed contact with Epstein in December 2010, would return years later to haunt him. On Sunday, British newspapers revealed damning evidence that directly contradicted his story. An email sent by Andrew to Epstein on February 28, 2011, in which he wrote, "We are in this together. We will have to rise above it." It was a revelation that reignited fury and confirmed suspicions that Andrew had misled the public. For the monarchy, it was the ultimate breach of trust, a reminder that his scandal was not merely a personal failing, but a continuing threat to the institution itself. Inside Buckingham Palace, the word banishment began circulating, a harsh term but one that fit the moment. It did not mean eviction from his home at Royal Lodge, where Andrew still resides, but a complete severance from royal life. He would no longer represent the crown, receive institutional support, or play any public role. In essence, he became a private citizen again, still a prince by birth, but one whose royal identity had been stripped bare. And yet, even as the dust from his exile settled, another storm gathered on the horizon. Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir, set for release the following Tuesday, threatened to reopen every wound the royal family had tried to heal. Giuffre, who died by suicide in April at just 41, had been one of the most vocal survivors of Epstein's network. Her brother, Sky Roberts, told the BBC, "In a lot of ways, this vindicates Virginia." The memoir, already excerpted in several newspapers, was expected to reveal new details, offering her unfiltered voice one final time. For King Charles, the timing was catastrophic. He had only days to act before a global media frenzy revived the scandal. Palace insiders now believe his decision to finalize Andrew's removal on October 17th was no coincidence. It was a calculated, preemptive strike. By taking visible, decisive action before the memoir's release, the king sought to show the world that the monarchy had already purged the rot, that no lingering leniency remained for his brother. The strategy aligns with Charles's broader vision for a leaner, more accountable monarchy. Unlike his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, whose instinct was to shield her family from public humiliation, Charles has prioritized the long-term survival of the institution over personal sentiment. To him, the monarchy's strength lies in moral credibility, not bloodline immunity. Andrew's banishment, therefore, is more than just punishment. It is a warning. The era of silent forgiveness within the royal family has come to an end, and as the king fights his own battle with illness, his resolve has only hardened. He knows the crown cannot endure another scandal of this magnitude. For Prince Andrew, it means a life lived in permanent shadow. For the monarchy, a ruthless recalibration meant to ensure it survives the storm still brewing just beyond the palace gates. So how did a brother's downfall become the crown's final safeguard? And what unseen storm still threatens the palace from within? Stay glued. A brother's fall and a king's resolve. For years, Prince Andrew's name lingered at the edge of scandal, but the warning signs came long before the Epstein affair. As early as 2007, his decision to sell his Windsor home for nearly 20%, above the $15 million asking price raised eyebrows. The buyer, Timur Kulibayev, son-in-law of Kazakhstan's then president, ignited suspicion that influence, not property, Was the true commodity exchanged? The whispers never vanished, but under Queen Elizabeth's quiet protection, they were contained. Years later, another troubling connection emerged. A businessman identified in court as a suspected Chinese spy. Barred from entering the UK for national security reasons, the man was accused of trying to exploit his association with Andrew. Once again, the Duke's judgment came under scrutiny, fueling the image of a prince dangerously blind to consequence. What once looked like isolated lapses began to form a pattern of reckless associations and blurred moral boundaries. When the Epstein saga erupted, it didn't merely expose Andrew's poor choices. It illuminated years of denial and privilege that the monarchy could no longer defend. Inside Buckingham Palace, unease hardened into action. Royal historian Sally Bedell Smith later revealed that Andrew's so-called decision to step back was not voluntary. He was absolutely forced into this, she said. He'd been given every chance to act with dignity and refused. King Charles, now the face of a monarchy fighting for modern credibility, had no room for ambiguity. By stripping Andrew of his remaining titles, Charles made a declaration. The survival of the institution outweighed loyalty to family. This was not vengeance. It was preservation. The symbolic removal of the Duke of York title carried deep resonance. Once a role of duty and stature, it now lay vacant. A silent reminder that royal privilege comes with responsibility. Andrew remains visible but voiceless, a prince in exile, dependent on private support, yet cut off from royal purpose. What began as a family crisis has become a constitutional reckoning. Andrew's inability to clear his past, the resurfacing of leaked emails, and the looming release of Virginia Giuffre's memoir forced the king's hand. In this new age of accountability, even royal blood cannot shield one from consequence. But what if this wasn't just about scandal or survival, but a quiet battle for the soul of the monarchy itself? Stay with us. The final line: drawn. For King Charles III, the decision to act against his brother came at a moment of extraordinary delicacy. The monarchy was already walking a tightrope, and the timing of this latest revelation could not have been more precarious. Just days before his scheduled state visit to the Vatican, where he is expected to meet and pray beside Pope Leo XIV, the king faced the daunting task of balancing duty, faith, and family in the harshest of spotlights. This visit, meant to be a powerful symbol of interfaith unity, carried deep personal meaning for Charles. It represented the culmination of years spent championing the idea of harmony among religions, a belief so central to his public identity that theologian George Gross of King's College London called it part of his mantra. Yet, as the world prepared to watch the monarch bridge spiritual divides, the shadow of his brother's scandals once again threatened to engulf the institution he now leads. Those close to the palace say the king acted swiftly, perhaps more decisively than ever before, not merely out of frustration, but necessity. As Gross noted, this was the quickest way of lowering Andrew's status even more without having to go through Parliament, an approach that spared the monarchy a long and potentially humiliating public debate. Every hour mattered. A delay, even a brief one, risked further headlines, more speculation, and another erosion of credibility that Charles could ill afford. Behind the scenes, the king's resolve was also shaped by the need to protect others within the royal circle, particularly Queen Camilla and the Duchess of Edinburgh. Both women have built their public work around issues of female dignity and safety. Camilla's commitment to combating domestic violence and Sophie's advocacy against sexual violence in war zones from Congo to Kosovo are now seen as pillars of modern royal service. The continuing presence of Andrew and the controversies that follow him threatened to overshadow that work entirely. For Charles, the decision to cut ties was as much about shielding their efforts as safeguarding the crown. But this latest move may not mark the end of the story. Many royal commentators believe the king is preparing to go even further, perhaps by stripping Andrew of his prince title altogether. Legally, all it would take is a letter from the king's hand. Yet, complications remain. Andrew continues to reside at Royal Lodge, a sprawling residence on the Windsor estate that he refuses to vacate, although the king has already cut off private funding in what some insiders call an effort to smoke him out. Andrew holds a cast-iron lease that could last nearly 170 years. As long as he pays the rent, eviction is legally impossible, setting the stage for what could become a bitter legal standoff between two brothers once united by blood, now divided by duty. In the middle of this tension stands Sarah Ferguson, Andrew's ex-wife, who still shares the residence in what many see as an awkward yet enduring partnership. Her own charities and business interests have suffered collateral damage from his downfall, and the question of whether she will or can make a clean break now lingers in the air. Even more painfully, the scandal has cast an unrelenting shadow over their daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. Though blameless, they find themselves caught in the crossfire, their positions within the royal order of succession potentially destabilized by their father's disgrace. He may not have brought down the monarchy itself, but Prince Andrew's actions have reshaped its contours, leaving scars that extend far beyond his own fate. Scars that reach deep into the heart of a family, a kingdom, and the very meaning of royal accountability. And how did one man's fall from grace ignite a quiet storm within the royal bloodline, rewriting what accountability truly means for a crown? The illusion of accountability. Prince Andrew's downfall, dramatic as it appears, is not just a royal crisis. It is part of a much larger, global pattern. Across every corner of power, from Buckingham Palace to Wall Street boardrooms, from government offices to Silicon Valley campuses, the same story plays out in different disguises. A scandal erupts, outrage follows, and then comes the performance, a carefully choreographed display of remorse and reform that soothes public anger without ever disturbing the foundations of power. It is not about justice, it is about survival. When the public's faith begins to crack, when ordinary people start questioning whether the system they live under is fair, those at the top act swiftly. They sacrifice a few names, stage inquiries, deliver solemn statements of accountability, and insist that lessons have been learned. But behind the scenes, nothing truly changes. The structure, the concentration of privilege, wealth, and control remains untouched. The royal family's treatment of Andrew is not an exception to this rule. It is an example of it. A lesson in how the powerful manage crises not by reforming the system, but by preserving it through spectacle. Consider how often this playbook has been used. When reckless bankers crashed the global economy in 2008, few faced real punishment. Bonuses were still paid, and the same institutions that caused the collapse grew even larger. When corrupt officials in one country are exposed, they are quietly replaced by others who look, think, and act just like them. When tech giants are caught exploiting privacy or manipulating markets, they issue apologies, promise reforms, and continue expanding their dominance. The same cycle repeats itself because the true purpose is not correction. It is containment. In modern society, the greatest danger to any elite is not scandal. It is delegitimization. The moment the public stops believing that the system is fair, even in theory, the foundation of power begins to crumble. That is why the performance of accountability exists. It gives people something to watch, something to believe has changed, while ensuring that nothing essential actually does. The problem is always framed as individual failure, a prince's moral lapse, a CEO's greed, a politician's poor judgment, never the machinery of privilege that enabled it all. And so the public gets catharsis, the media gets its headline, and the system carries on. This is not cynicism, it's an understanding of how power endures. For centuries, the powerful have relied on symbolic sacrifice, managed outrage, and cosmetic reform to maintain control. It works, but only for as long as people keep believing that the system itself remains fundamentally good. That belief, however, is beginning to fracture. The internet, for all its flaws, has stripped away many of the old illusions. People can now trace the flow of wealth, see how laws are shaped, and watch privilege move from one generation to the next. They can compare their own struggles to the opulent lives of those who claim to represent them. And as this awareness spreads, the old performance begins to lose its magic. So when we hear that a prince has surrendered his titles, or that a company has apologized for wrongdoing, we should ask what really lies beneath. Are we witnessing accountability? Or choreography? Is the system correcting itself? Or simply buying time? Because if the royal family's management of Andrew's scandal teaches us anything, it is that power will always do what it must to survive, even if it means pretending to fall, just long enough to rise again, untouched. But what could drive a monarchy built on image to sacrifice one of its own? Survival, strategy, or something far more calculated? When the crowns lose their shine. It's a masterstroke of survival, a move so precise that it calms public fury while leaving the foundation of privilege untouched. The monarchy stands, the wealth endures, and the system that divides remains perfectly intact. But this raises a far deeper and more troubling question. Why do we, in the 21st century, still accept institutions that thrive on inherited privilege while millions fight daily for the bare minimum? Why do we still believe that inequality is somehow natural, that some are born to rule while others must struggle to live? The truth is unsettling. The monarchy, much like the political and economic systems that surround it, rests on a simple but cruel belief that hierarchy is part of human nature, that it has always existed and that it always will. It's the same story told across centuries in different languages and through different uniforms. That those at the top are not just wealthier or luckier, but somehow better. They are portrayed as more capable, more refined, more deserving, while the rest are told to work harder, expect less, and be grateful for crumbs from the same tables that feast on their labor. This belief doesn't stay trapped inside palaces or parliaments. It seeps quietly into the fabric of everyday life, into classrooms where children are taught to admire power, into workplaces where obedience is rewarded more than innovation, and into the quiet corners of our minds where self-worth becomes measured by proximity to privilege. It's what allows billionaires to be seen as visionaries while the people who build their empires are treated as expendable. It's what keeps the machinery of inequality humming smoothly beneath the noise of daily life. And yet, when you strip away the ceremony, the titles, the gilded halls, the televised pageantry, what remains? Human beings. Flawed, fragile, no more virtuous than anyone else. People whose comfort depends on a system designed to keep them there. The monarchy, like every institution built on hierarchy, endures not because it's essential, but because it's believed in, because enough people have been taught to see it not as privilege, but as tradition, not as exclusion, but as heritage. But history whispers a different truth. Belief can break. It breaks when people start to see power not as destiny, but as design. It breaks when workers recognize that the wealth they create flows upward, not outward. It breaks when the public begins to understand that the apologies, the resignations, and the symbolic sacrifices, a prince losing his title, a CEO stepping down, a government promising reform, are simply tools of control, meant to give the illusion of change while protecting the structure beneath. Real change, the kind that reshapes societies, has never come from the top voluntarily stepping aside. Power doesn't surrender, it adjusts. It trades symbols for survival. Every meaningful leap forward, voting rights, fair labor, civil equality, social protection, began not with royal decrees or corporate promises, but with ordinary people refusing to remain silent. Perhaps that's the deeper truth beneath all the headlines and royal scandals. When people stop believing in the myths of nobility, when prestige no longer equals virtue, and when power is measured not by inheritance, but by integrity, that is when the crowns begin to lose their shine. Because the real question isn't what a prince gives up, but what a society finally decides it will no longer accept. So what do you think? Was King Charles's decision to strip his own brother of royal titles an act of justice, or a quiet betrayal written in duty's name? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the story of the crown isn't over yet.